What's up, Reject Nation? I'm Greg.
I'm John.
We watched the comedy,
Yes.
the political comedy, the R-rated family comedy, the conspiracy
That's a great way to put
thriller, Irresistible, written and directed by the former Daily Show host Jon Stewart.
Oh, yeah.
Starring Steve Carell, Chris Cooper, and Rose Byrne. Was that Mackenzie Davis? I haven't looked at the IMDb.
Yes.
There's Mackenzie Davis. Yeah.
Mackenzie Davis, yeah. There's a Will Sasso in there. There are a few people who show up.
We actually watched this on the service, Row 8. So thanks for sponsoring this video, Row 8. I actually really like this streaming service a lot. It was my mom's birthday this week, and as a treat, we rented Scoob off of Row 8 for her, because I told her in the first half hour, if you don't like this, you can return it and replace it for something else.
It's a movie love guarantee.
And she did. They watched Birds of Prey instead.
A glowing review for Birds of Prey and a not glowing review for Scoob.
Courtesy of Row 8, if you guys do want to rent this movie, it's $2 off this specific rental. You can use the link in the description box, link and pin comment as well. They have a whole lot of great deals, $1.50 off your first rental. Buck Off Tuesday, where you save $1 off of all new releases all day. Happy hour from midnight to 3 p.m. Really recommend Row 8. I've been using them on my own, so give them a shot. I think it's well worth it. Even if it's this you don't want to watch, just go through their selection. They got plenty of options.
They got summer movies starting at $1.
We don't need to oversell it, all right? I use the service. That's good enough for them. And I believe Double Toast has been working with them as well. There's a reason why. So Irresistible, written and directed by Jon Stewart. Here is the plot. Pitched on IMDb. A Democratic strategist played by Steve Carell helps a retired veteran played by Chris Cooper run for mayor in a small conservative Midwest town. Things really kick in a high gear when his Republican strategist rival Rose Byrne steps into the picture to try to ruin this campaign. So the main thing I was looking forward to before watching this movie was Steve Carell's performance, because Steve Carell, he came from the Daily Show with Jon Stewart. The fact of them reuniting together sounded like a really fun time, and I was like, at least that should be good. So a really good positive I can tell you is that Steve Carell's performance is really good. All the performances all around are pretty solid. Rose Byrne, it was fun seeing her embody a villainous character again. I think there's a big laugh that I got from her that's actually in the trailer. Chris Cooper turns in a really sincere performance. I gotta say, it's a very
earnest,
very sincere performance. Here's what I like about it. I like what it's commentating on. The messages it's trying to convey. That's like the main jazz of the film that I really did enjoy. Like, this movie really is setting out to expose the manipulation that happens within the voting system. Of course, a lot of talks about the financial side of things.
The lack of regulation in super PACs and the way that basically big Washington political folks will swoop in on small towns for the notoriety and to help their bigger bottom line, and then vacate them and not actually demonstrate any care or follow through on their promises.
Yeah, there's a lot that it wants to explore in this movie. I'd say that if this movie knew its tone, this could have been a very impactful film.
Yeah.
Because it wants to be like a Barry Levinson type of comedy, like a Wag the Dog, one of those political comedies, right? To me, at least this is how it registered when I was watching it, is that Jon Stewart has a lot on his mind. Ideally, I think that when you hear Jon Stewart's writing and directing this movie, these are the kind of topics you're probably going to want him to cover, right? I mean, I'm assuming that's what people would want from the guy.
And his first movie was pretty decently received, too.
The movie, really, especially in the first half, I didn't feel like the comedy felt natural. It actually seemed like I have a lot I want to talk about, but people probably won't listen unless the movie's a comedy.
Yeah.
And I think this movie probably would have worked better as a dramedy with a little bit more emphasis on the comedy side.
Oh, yeah.
But instead of pitching this as a comedy, kind of puts it in this weird land of real problematic tonal issues.
Well, yeah, because the problem is it's torn between a few different kinds of comedy. It doesn't seem to know whether it wants to be a, family, a small town wholesome comedy, or whether it wants to be a satire or a broad farce at times. Like, there are a couple moments especially where I found myself truly disoriented by like a new scene turning up with a random scenario in it that doesn't seem to fit the rest of the rules of the movie or whatever.
No, because there are scenes where it seemed like, okay, maybe this is more on like the grounded take where it's like the Judd Apatow like banter with a bit of a heightened surreal quality to it. Then there are times where it's like, this is so cartoony, like like there's this thing where a cyborg comes into the picture.
I was very thrown by that scene. And I was like, is this a real
cyborg,
guy? Is
that's
this
what
a
it
guy?
came across like.
Yeah, this guy in this full body, like mechanized brace suit. And I was sitting there going, is this a real person? Is this a reference? Is this some kind of farcical creation that you've done to demonstrate something that I'm not quite catching here?
Really, the main issue with this movie was I don't think it knew how to make its comedy really work. Out of an hour and 40-minute movie, I can count on one hand the amount of times, like, there was one time I really laughed. Really laughed like pretty hard. And that was way late into the movie. And there were a couple times where I laughed.
I laughed half the time because I thought it was funny, and half the time because I was like, I'm a little confused by what's happening.
The movie's comedy clicks a lot better, and the reason I'm talking so much about the comics is that's like the biggest flaw with this movie, actually. It starts clicking a lot better, especially tonally, once Rose Byrne's character steps into this town, because she just really loves, she's the antagonist of the movie, and her main thing is she loves to antagonize Steve Carell. Yeah. She doesn't need to be here, you know? Like her character doesn't need to be here. She's just here to ruin Steve Carell's life. And when that stuff starts picking up a lot of momentum and the stakes start being raised to where it really is like, okay, how will Steve Carell's team beat their opponent, the guy who's been mayor in this city for 40 years or whatever? How can they pull this off? That's when like the stakes combined with some scenes of, like, there's this one moment where Steve Carell makes an ass out of himself going off on someone. You might know what I'm referencing. And it's so like, ugh.
There's some cringe in this movie.
It's cringy, but then it ends up being the funniest scene in the whole movie to me. The movie can be very charming, and what it's talking about, I think, is really great stuff. It sets itself up to be like this Republican hate movie, right? That's what it comes across like. Don't get me wrong, it starts off that way. Like the first half of the movie, it's really like Democratic up here, Republican way down.
You're following this guy who's like, we're going to rebrand the party with this dude, and yeah.
The town is a conservative state. I think if I'm remembering correctly, Chris Cooper's character is set up in a way where he is probably identifies as Republican, and they want to make him a Democrat.
Yeah, he demonstrates some ideals in this viral video that are clearly not trademark Republican ideals.
As the movie progresses, though, it really starts uncovering the dark side, like I said earlier in this video, of the voting system, and showing that, hey,
and the campaigning process overall.
And on the Democratic side, there's a lot of corruption there, you know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this movie zeroes in on the amount of spin and the way the divide truly between Steve Carell and his Washington team and the actual folks in the town. And there's a lot in this movie that plays on his obliviousness to them.
What I liked, too, about the movie is Steve Carell, he gives an earnest performance, and there are times where his character is a total asshole. Like, he's very condescending, and evidently he just thinks he's better than everyone.
Yeah, he's just looking down on the small town stereotype.
And he looks down on his team too, you know? It seems like the movie's setting up for this really obvious arc, but it doesn't quite land there. Instead, you get this really interesting twist. When I say conspiracy thriller, you will not predict it. I don't think you will.
You won't.
The movie doesn't set you up for it.
You might.
Yet there are seeds there.
There are seeds there, yeah. There are things where if you don't use the movie love and switch it out after a half hour, there are things that will pay off from the early part of the movie that maybe stood out as strange when the actual true nature of the film reveals itself. And the thing is, with that, again, that cuts to the heart of, I like what this movie's about a lot, and I like ultimately what it did. I just feel like there's something odd in the way it chose to present its point of view, because you're going through Steve Carell's lens, and yet it feels like the movie itself wants to be from the townsfolk's point of view and from their needs and all that. I feel like in executing that, they really kind of slighted themselves in not humanizing and spending more character time with the folks in the town. You do get them, they are heartwarming, but in terms of the actual character depth, you're mostly with Steve Carell.
Well, I mean, it's still
not the movie's true protagonist.
The movie still felt like Jon Stewart giving observational comedy, but not making a movie lived in with its characters, and then letting the messages. Like sometimes you do have to make sure you're getting your messages clear cut across, especially in a political comedy like this. You could just hear Jon Stewart's. I'm not even that knowledgeable of Jon Stewart. I'm not even like that big of a fan necessarily. I've always liked his comedy, and I've always liked whatever I've caught of The Daily Show, but I never really was like religiously watching that show or weekly even, you know? So I'm not the biggest Jon Stewart fanatic or something, but watching it, there were things where, especially in the first half of this movie, I was like, I don't think he wanted to make a comedy.
I would wonder what the actual ideal script was, because it seems like something that would have needed to maybe be a little bit longer and go into that big short territory where there is rhythm, there is comedy, but there's also a lot of political discourse. It's a little at odds with itself in terms of how it's presenting its point of view and what its plot needs to do to sell certain things. I think that this could have used a little more formulation in the scripting, and that would have maybe helped the direction be a little more consistent. As it stands, though, I mean, there are a lot of really fun performances, and there are scenes and moments that really work, and what's at the heart of the movie. And there's even an interesting little interview in the end credits about the circumstances of the movie that are worth, looking into. If they're not the newest news, they're still, worth looking into.
Well, that's what I'll say is what was working for me a little bit better was when they did really play with media in the last half. Those were the few times where it really seemed like it knew what it was doing. Yeah. I mean, that's the other thing that I love about Jon Stewart as a human is like he seems like a great dude.
Yeah, he seems
like
really invested in the stuff
guy.
he wants to talk about. Yeah, he's been active and he's been walking the walk since the Daily Show too, like actually out campaigning for various causes and things.
I love what his comedy represents in terms of the movie. It felt at odds with itself with what kind of comedy this wanted to be, and that actually seems to distract more from what it wants to talk about.
Yeah, and so you kind of get everything punching a little below its weight because of that.
I'm not sure who would like this or who wouldn't.
I really don't know. I don't know who this would nail it for.
Because I thought it was fine. Overall, I would steer towards I liked it. I just also can't help but be like, it's also kind of weird.
It is. It's tonally jarring at times. There are times where, too, also just in its actual handling of certain concepts could have been a little more clear or a little more pronounced. I think it also is an interesting just growth illustrator for Jon Stewart as a writer-director because, I haven't seen Rosewater, but I've heard some reasonably decent things about it, better than I've heard about this. And so it seems like this is illustrating at least some places he has to grow in terms of, cinematic political comedy.
Yeah.
Because, where the Daily Show errs toward comedy, but is also, very much about the politics, I felt like this could have kind of done the opposite more effectively, being definitely comedic, but also very focused on, the people and the story and whatnot.
Because there were too much of Jon Stewart's talking to the audience as opposed to just letting the characters do the job. And there was too much of that.
Yeah, there were a lot of moments where I would find myself like predicting things or being like, okay, I get what you're setting up here. There are a lot of things where you really get what they're setting up and they don't make up for that with the character.
Nah.
But yeah, it's an interestingly odd
I'll tell
movie.
you, I don't. I'll tell on this. I don't know.
Tickle your brain. If you're interested, check it out.
Check it out.
It's a strange.
Or if you start watching the first half hour, it ain't for you. Return it and get something else.
On row 8.
Did you see Irresistible? What's your favorite Steve Carell thingy or Jon Stewart thingy? Yay. Subscribe to The Real Rejects. Click that notification bell. Thanks for 08 for sponsoring this video. Catch you guys soon.